So I have just watched the Channel 4 leadership debate for number 10. That's really what it is. It isn't just for Tory leadership, it is for number 10 and our 55th Prime Minister. So there is a lot of things I want to say around this, so it may be a bit of a longer video. Please bear with me. As you can see, I've been taking lots of notes, like literally just little bullet points, and it's a bit of a mess, so bear with me. I'm going to start by addressing the big elephant in the room, which was the elephant not in the room, Boris Johnson. He just didn't turn up. Now, whether this was his own decision, whether this was his team thinking it was politically clever to not turn up, I don't know. It may well be that his team didn't want to risk a sort of gaffe in this sort of scenario. Now, Johnson has done debates before. He'd done debates whilst running for Mayor of London, but head to head, I believe, with Ken Livingstone. But when you want to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and you're the front runner, I think that can look like arrogance. It can look like he's kind of taking this coronation, speculated coronation, for granted. And I think that's a big mistake. Um, I mean, as it stands, the last opinion poll of Conservative Home showed that Johnson was soaring ahead in the polling of 1,500 members. 54%. Hunt was a distant second. So it may be that the Johnson team are just complacent. But if I was a Conservative member, I would think I wouldn't take that kindly. I mean, I wouldn't take that in a good light. I would think it was a bit arrogant to assume that he's above being questioned. And Hunt pointed that out and got an applause. Rory Stewart also said that without naming Johnson directly, he hoped that one of them would be Prime Minister. I don't think it comes across well. I mean, I'm not underestimating Johnson for a second. He's a larger than life figure. He's a fascinating figure. I find him very interesting. I love watching Johnson videos. But when you're running for Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, I think you need to open yourself up to scrutiny. Um, I mean, these five men have put themselves in the firing line. They've opened themselves up to scrutiny. That's the right way to go about it. Um, okay, like I said, there's a lot of points I want to address. I'm going to start actually with the last question. A young guy said that what is, think of humility. What would you consider to be a weakness? This is something I think politicians should always prepare for in a debate scenario because they're kind of trained by their staffers, by themselves, to always be tough. In fact, earlier in the debate, Rory Stewart attacked what he saw as the machismo of this, and it's not always about looking the toughest. I actually felt he came across as a little bit too sensitive at times. I quite like Rory Stewart, and I don't think he is weak, incidentally. This is a man who's lived and worked in war zones, so I don't think he's weak, but he came across as a little bit pedantic at times during the debate. Anyway, the question was, what is your weakness? So, some interesting answers there. Rory Stewart said he's got a lot of weaknesses, and one of them was ignorance. He wants to learn more about the world. He wants to educate himself. I do think if you were to give Stuart credit, he does tend to come across as the adult a lot of the time. On the other hand, it could be that he's a little bit too honest, saying that you're ignorant, and I don't think he is. I think he's a pretty smart man, but saying that you're ignorant is maybe not the best pitch when you want to lead a nation. It's honest, but I'm not sure if it's the best pitch. Um, Dominic Raab said he was restless. He always wanted to get things done, and he mentioned mentoring a young boxer who had been a young offender in Newham, not far from where the debate studio was. Christian Gurren Murphy followed up on that. A quick word, by the way, about Christian Gurren Murphy's approach. Channel 4 is known to be quite a left wing network, and Christian Gurren Murphy showed that a few times. He came out with a question. I mean, I suppose it was fair insofar as he put all the candidates on the spot, and he did. But he said, wouldn't your weakness be failing women because you criticize feminism or something along those lines? I really have a problem with that. This idea that if a male politician, or any man for that matter, criticizes feminism, he's somehow against women. It's a perverse distortion. There's a lot of women who are critical of feminism. I think Rab handled his response pretty well. He said, well, it's easy to take a distortion of what I said. I was calling out double standards, but judge me on my record. I think that's probably, it's a good answer because Guru Murphy was trying to make that about feminism, and it's absurd to say that the only way you can show that you care about equality is by calling yourself a feminist. That's like saying you only care about workers' rights if you call yourself a socialist, or you only care about tough justice if you call yourself a conservative. And Rab was right to say, forget the labeling. Um, Now, interesting happened with Sajid Javid. He said that his weakness was stubbornness. Um, and that's kind of a clever answer, I think, for a politician, because stubbornness can also be seen as a strength. Anyway, Gary Murphy followed up. He said, well, some would say your weakness is being seen as irrelevant. For example, you weren't invited to the state dinner with Donald Trump. Now, an interesting thing happened. To a man, the candidates attacked Gary Murphy for that question. They implied it was below the belt. In fact, Michael Gove got quite angry and he fiercely defended Sajid Javid. He even called him a hero. And he said it shouldn't be up to the American president to determine who is an important British politician. Sajid Javid is the Home Secretary. It's a great office of state. He's the first British Asian to hold that role, so I don't think we could call him insignificant. Um, I've been a bit harsh on Gove of late, so I'll give him credit. He fiercely defended his rival. I'll give him credit for that. But that's interesting. I think that was a bit of a low blow by Christian Guru Murphy, because he was kind of putting importance in Trump's opinion. Let's stop determining domestic British politics by what Donald Trump thinks. That's my opinion. And I think a lot of the Tory candidates here also hold that view. It's not up to Donald Trump to decide who is important and who isn't. Um, Michael Gove said his weakness was impatience. He wants to get things done. A follow up to that was the cocaine thing. I think that was a fair follow up, actually, by Christian Guru Murphy. Guru Murphy said, well, isn't your weakness hypocrisy? And I think that's a fair question because I believe that. I believe Gove is a hypocrite. Um, his response was, "You don't lower the standards. You accept what you've done is wrong, and you don't lower the standards." Interestingly, Jeremy Hunt defended him on that. He said, "Let's get real about this debate. Let's talk about the real issues, not what people done 20 years ago." I don't entirely agree with that by either Gold's response or Hunt's defense of it. I do think that track records matter, and I do think that an issue like hypocrisy matters. It's not the fact that Michael Gove used drugs. Yes, everyone's done things they regret. It's a hypocrisy that is a problem, and I do think that's a problem. Um, I don't think it's enough to say you don't lower the standards, you just reflect on what you've done when he is, because the perception is of elitism. Why should there be liberal or conservative privilege or double standards when it comes to drug use? There shouldn't be. um, Jeremy Hunt's weakness. He said he joked about getting his wife's name wrong. Wrong. He famously called his Chinese wife Japanese when he was meeting a Chinese delegation. But he also said that he looks gentle. Well, it's a matter of opinion. Um, but he can be stubborn. Again, the stubborn thing. It's a strong answer for a politician to give. He did concede that in his well documented battle with junior doctors, he maybe could have handled that better, and he admitted that maybe he should have communicated his case better. So he did acknowledge that. Hunt is a very controversial figure. He was a controversial health secretary, and he, took the bull by the horns and addressed that. So he didn't skirt over the issue, and he brought that up. Guru Murphy didn't bring that up. So I think I've addressed all the answers to the weakness question. Um, Hunt was the only candidate tonight who said that he would also want to reassure the 48% people who voted Remain, that includes me, um, of the concerns that they have. I appreciate that. because too much of the discourse in recent years has been politicians pitching to leave means leave and we need to deliver Brexit, etc. All the Tory candidates have been doing it. And I totally understand that because they do have a democratic responsibility to do that. But, and I feel very strongly about this, democracy is not about only listening to the winning side and ignoring almost half the population. So I'm grateful to Jeremy Hunt for saying that. I think that was very important. Um, and he was the only candidate who did. Dominic Raab attacked Rory Stewart at one point. For the most part, the debate was civil, but there were a few testy moments. He accused Stewart of wanting a citizens' assembly Maduro style. Um, Rory Stewart is the only candidate, it seems, that has totally taken no deal off the table. But Dominic Raab said, as a negotiator, as an experienced negotiator, you don't take walking away off the table. Now, I'll be honest, I don't like the idea of a no deal. That's a valid point. To totally take it off the table is maybe misguided. But all the candidates, even Boris Johnson, has said they don't want that to be an option. Jeremy Hunt has pitched the fact that he would be the first prime minister to be an entrepreneur. I think that's a winner in Tory circles. Um, will it go down well with the wider public? I don't know. Javid got quite angry at one point, and this was directed at Rab. He was attacking Rab for suggesting that he would prorogue Parliament, which hasn't been done, I understand, since the reign of King Charles I. What Javid said, and he was quite angry about this, we're not selecting a dictator. You don't respect democracy by disregarding democracy, and the British parliamentary democracy is the hallmark of conservatism and of this nation. So I think he got a round of applause at that point. He also, actually, it was Stuart who got a round of applause by pointing out that Tony Blair done that, and it did backfire against Tony Blair. He got quite a steady round of applause. I should say, I don't think the audience were like Tory members. I think they were mixed. I mean, if they were, that wasn't stated. Um, Michael Gove pointed out that Nigel Farage is not the face of Brexit. Um, Sajid Javid said we should all unite behind the leader. That was a strong answer. I mean, he also said, and he got a round of applause for this, you don't beat the Brexit Party by becoming the Brexit Party. But Rory Stewart was the only candidate who said he would talk to both Nigel Farage and the trade unions. That I like to hear that, that he would pitch to both left and right, but it also feels a little bit utopian, almost wanting to please everyone at once. Maybe it's a little bit unrealistic. Um, I mean, it has to be said, Stuart is, he has the weakest support at the moment. He has a few MPs backing him, so he really does have an uphill struggle. Let's see. One thing I like about Dominic Raab's pitch, he did point out that university is not the only path to success. It's not the only way to determine if a young person can be successful. I totally agree with that. Let's see. Yeah, I think I've covered all the talking points I've added here. Who do I think performed the strongest? At a push, I'd say Jeremy Hunt. If I had to just pick a name out of a hat, Jeremy Hunt. But honestly, I wouldn't say any of the men tonight were terrible. I honestly don't think any of these guys would make a terrible prime minister. Stuart probably is the last in the pack in terms of the support he has, but I think he is mature. I think he's smart, but would be a big leap up. He's got only junior ministerial experience. Um, I think Hunt really is the man to beat Johnson. However, Rab and Javid are following on his tail, and Gove. Um, Anything could happen. But I really do think that Johnson definitely deserves to. I mean, if this was a boxing match, he should have some points taken off him for this no show. I think it's a little bit cowardly, frankly, to not put himself up for that sort of scrutiny. Um, and, hopefully Tory members will see that. think I've covered everything. Yeah, that's all the notes I made. I'm sure there's a lot of other talking points. Gove did attack both what he called Rab's defeatism and Stuart's defeatism. I missed a follow up on that. I just wrote it down as a note here. He did point out that, unlike the other candidates, he believed in Brexit from the very start. That may be a good pitch for Michael Gove. That unlike the others, he is, a, he is apart from Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, really the face of Brexit. I mean, the Three Musketeers, Farage, Johnson, and Gove, were the three men more than any others who were the face of Brexit. But they were also right to point out that Farage, Brexit is about more than Mr. Farage. Um, and whilst the Brexit Party has done very well, I personally think that is very much a protest vote against the Tories and against Labour. I think Nigel Farage is very good at, complaining about being the voice of protest. I don't think he either wants to or is ready to be leading a party of government. I mean, he's a carnival barker, really, and he's very effective at it. But he's very good at throwing stones, not so good at actually giving solid answers. But anyway, I'll leave it there. It was interesting. I'm pleased I watched it. Johnson's no-show is a big issue for me. I'm not entirely against the Johnson premiership. I think there's some good things about Johnson. I like that he's not politically correct. I like he's blunt about certain things, but sometimes that bluntness can come across as just a crass lack of diplomacy. And his no show tonight looks like arrogance. Um, I would have liked to hear more on foreign policy, particularly China. I want to hear particularly Jeremy Hunt's stance on that, given that he is most likely the man to beat Johnson. I want to hear. I want to hear one of these men say that. I mean, Rory Stewart was born in British Hong Kong. I want to hear their views on how they will deal with a belligerent China, and I want a prime minister who stands up to China. That's very important for me. May, to her credit, stood up to Russia, but we need a prime minister who stands up to China for once. And so far, I haven't heard it from any of these men. I want to hear that, and I want to hear that question asked directly. How will you specifically stand up to China? Leave it there. Anything can happen.